I pay homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. I also extend my gratitude to the community here today for allowing me to speak and share the Dhamma with you. Today my topic is on right speech and social media. Not because I'm an expert on either of those things, but in fact because right speech or skillful speech is something that I feel that I have struggled with a lot throughout the course of my life, and I feel that many others probably feel the same way. And social media is one of those ways we can be really unskillful with each other, I found, especially myself. You know, I had a very big wake-up call a couple years ago, I think, when I thought I was being really skillful with speech, and then I saw a friend request on Facebook from my mother-in-law, and I cringed at it. I go like, oh, I don't know if I want her to see my Facebook. And then you start to wonder, all right, how skillful can you possibly be if you can't accept a friend request from your mother-in-law, you know? So I've given this topic much thought over the past month, and you know, I've really thought about right speech and social media, and in my head it became even bigger, kind of a, you know, sila in general and social media, because the internet is so much of our lives now. We can have businesses online, so now we're looking at right livelihood. You know, we can take various actions, not just speech, various things that we do with our time on social media and on the internet. So I will try to focus more predominantly on right speech, but understand that this could be a much bigger topic. In fact, morality in general in Buddhism could be a huge topic that in the West can sometimes be overlooked in favor of, say, meditation entirely, or only looked at as something in support of meditation. Now, for me, I have an interesting history with morality in general because I had a Catholic upbringing, and so as I got older into my teens and 20s, I really didn't want anyone to tell me how I should behave, how I should speak. You know, I didn't want any input on that. I figured I can figure it out on my own, I'll do my own thing, and I was practicing Buddhism, but mostly as a meditator. I meditated every day, did a lot of other things, but didn't really care too much about how I might be speaking, how I might be acting, right? I tried to be a good person in my own way, but didn't want anyone's advice. I think in the West, we often think of morality as the domain of the religious, in that it requires some type of deity to bestow morality upon us. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was listening to the radio, trying to find a new station while I was driving, and happened upon, I believe it was either a Catholic or a Christian radio station, and there was someone on there talking about, you know, moral law, and moral law requires a moral law giver, and basically setting up this hierarchy that could only end in some type of theistic belief. I find that the beauty of Buddhism is that there is no such requirement for morality. We don't need a lawgiver because the laws themselves are requisite enough. We can look at this world and see the law of cause and effect. We see that our actions have consequences. And we can also see that our consequences can either do good or they can do harm, right? And that was really what the Buddha had to say about the topic itself. We can see if something's skillful through our own direct experience. We can see if something's skillful by thinking about how it would affect us. If we're trying to steal from someone, how would we feel if someone was stealing from us? If we're cruel to someone in our speech, how would we feel if it was being done to us? And that in itself can be a measure. And so, with that in mind, it's good to, when we focus on the path, focus on all of it, because we understand that our conduct matters, that it can do good and it can do harm. And when you read something like the Dhammapada, or you read any of the Nikayas, you do hear words like good and evil being used to discuss our actions. Not in reference to any moral lawgiver, but in reference to what our actions do to others. Things that we can measure and see for ourselves. And so last month, or actually a couple months ago, my last talk, I talked about the path in general. I was reading a segment from the Dhammapada on the path. And in it, the Buddha does talk about sila, conduct, samadhi, what we talk about as meditation, right? And panya, wisdom. And I like talking about the Eightfold Path in this kind of tripartite fashion because I think it highlights how important each of those are. Much like a tripod, you need each of those legs to stand. If one of those is wobbly, if one of those isn't set right, it's only a matter of time before it all gets knocked over. So it's important to talk about conduct in its own right because it's not just a support for, say, meditation, right? All three aspects of the Eightfold Path both support and are supported by each other. Right speech in particular, of sila, of conduct, is something that I think we should all focus on because of the various things we can do, it's the easiest to slip up on. It's the easiest for us to fall short on because we talk, we communicate every single day. You know, most of us, we're not thieves, we're not moonlighting as assassins, but we talk to each other all the time. And talking is so much like thought. It's quick. It happens just like that. And 1, 2, 3 moments of mindlessness is all that's required to say something that is very damaging to yourself and others. So, before I start talking about right speech in terms of social media, I thought it would be helpful to remind ourselves of what right speech is in Buddhism in general, because I think you'll see as much as I do that the Buddha gave such good advice on right speech that we can see its immediate applications to social media. So I'm going to start by reading from a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is Sutta 51. This is the Kandaraka Sutta. And for those of you who haven't read this sutta, this is one in which the Buddha talks about the 4 kinds of people, right? Those that harm themselves, those that harm others, those that harm both themselves and others, and the one who neither harms him or herself or others. And so that 4th one is, for the Buddha, the one who has understood and is practicing the Dhamma, right? So in one part of this, he talks about the correct way to speak, right, or skillful speech. And it says, abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, nor does he repeat to these people what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus, he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear, the lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many and agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks on what is good, speaks on the Dhamma and the discipline. At the right time, he speaks such words as are worth recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. So we see that right speech is abstinence from false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, and both idle chatter and gossip. That's usually the way it's translated. So that means that the solution to those 4 areas that we abstain from is to speak what is true, right? Speak what is beneficial, what is kind, and to speak at the right time and in the proper way. Now, false speech can be tricky to avoid, more than we think. To talk about how that might apply to social media, it's really easy to share misinformation online. This is something that I've come across, right? Because all it takes is hitting that share button, and then we've sent something out into the world that may be true, maybe not. But by sending it out, we tend to be endorsing what we send, right? So I think that online we have a responsibility to only share what is true. If we know it to be true, we can share it. If there's any doubt, perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps we should wait until we can verify that we know what we're speaking is truth, right? I often think about certain things that I've shared to my embarrassment that turned out to be false, and by the time I've realized that, who knows how many thousands of people have seen it. And I don't want to be the person responsible for that, because we do take part of that responsibility. How could we not? We're sharing with the wide world this bit of information. So it bears to hold back, to take our time. Social media is set up in such a way that we want to share things as quickly as possible. If we do, people might miss out. People might not like enough of our comments, give enough feedback. And I believe that's especially important too when thinking about malicious speech. In this regard, we're trying to unify, not separate, not break different people apart. I find this to be problematic because I have various political beliefs. I'm sure many of us do. And I try to straddle that line between sharing information that could be helpful to others and might break apart friendships, might break apart familial ties. And that in itself can be heartbreaking when you think that you have made certain friendships strong out in the world, and then you go online and this person you've been talking to is an entirely different person. All of a sudden you find all sorts of beliefs and proclivities you had no idea existed. And so when you see things like that, do you antagonize them? Do you fight them? Do you go online and start making comments at them? It can be easy to do. I've done this myself, unfortunately. But that's when something like mindfulness can be very helpful in mitigating malicious and harsh speech. Because the Buddha tells us not to hide from the truth, but rather say so from a place of loving kindness, from a place of compassion. And so we need to look at our own emotions and check them before we respond. Unfortunately, I've seen even Buddhists speak very harshly to each other online. As I've been going out into the world and experiencing more Buddhism, I've been going to various temples, and the feeling I get there is so profound, so beautiful, so peaceful. Just this week, one of the Buddha's relics has been in the United States, and going there has brought me such joy. And then you go online, and all people can do is argue about the Dhamma. It's this is right, that's wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, we should be doing this, not doing that. And judging others. Here you are at this place, you shouldn't be at that place, you should be over here doing this instead. And I look at that and think, is that skillful? Is that kind? Is that helping anyone? Right? Recently, I've seen people debating drug use and Buddhism online. And I thought that this was a pretty clear-cut understanding of the Dhamma. You know, one of the precepts is to abstain from intoxication. I thought this was a no-brainer. A lot of people online beg to differ, particularly with psychedelic mushrooms. They think that's the way to get enlightened, and everyone needs to be doing that. And honestly, that's fine. People can do with what they want. But there were a lot of Buddhists chiming in on this issue, and I saw how the discussion completely devolved. People who are themselves teachers, people who are representing the Dhamma, I saw just devolve and start using harsh language at each other, and really just belittling each other and trying to create divisions. I don't think that can ever be good. That can never be the right way to do something. We're all emotional beings. You know, the Buddha never tells us that the goal is to, you know, completely cut ourselves off from feeling. Instead, it's to master them, to understand their nature, right? And if we can do that, then we probably wouldn't find ourselves in these predicaments in the first place. But until then, the reason why morality becomes so important is because it protects us from harming ourselves and others. When we go online, we find ourselves outside of our social circle. We find ourselves out in the world amongst various beliefs, various practices, various people of different levels of skillfulness, right? Out in the real world, even offline, we find ourselves with people who are not practicing as we practice, who are not following the path. It seems that for some of us, at least for me, it's easier to be kind in public. There's something about the anonymity of being online that a lot of people take and misuse. And that can be very troubling for us, because there are people online who make it their habit of trolling. You know, I believe that's what it's called, right? You go on any thread anywhere, and please don't read the comments, you know, because there's going to be someone who's going to twist whatever's said and use it to get a reaction out of people. And we, being unenlightened individuals, can react. It's that simple. Someone writes in all caps, they say something we don't like, and the ability to respond is right there, right in front of us. And so we do. I've recently been changing the way I think about social media and the way I use it, because social media is a tool. We should be using it. But much like a knife or a hammer is a tool, it can also be used as a weapon. It can build something up or destroy it. So now when I go online, it's very different. I've made it my job, my duty, to make social media as boring as possible. Because if it's boring, I won't want to go on there in the first place. Some people are good about that. They've deleted everything. They don't go online anymore. It works out. There are some pressures, though. Recently, my mother asked me, "Hey, why aren't you on Snapchat? We all are, right? You can't escape it. Everyone's going to ask, why aren't you online, right?" Maybe we should be, but in a different way. Maybe instead of sharing anything that comes across our timeline, we're judicious with it. And maybe just because we're friends with someone, we don't actually have to see everything that they post. This was a revelation for me, by the way. Maybe you can have a loved one that you visit on the holidays, and they're friends on Facebook, and that's fine. But you don't need to see maybe what they're sending out into the world. Because part of skillful speech is not just what we throw out there, it's also what we take in, what we consume. And a lot of us, I think, find so much negativity online. I know I've experienced it. Maybe you have too, for those of you who are on social media, who do actively have an account, say on Twitter or whatever else. It's hard not to see. And it somehow feels sometimes to us that it's disingenuous, maybe dishonest, maybe unskillful to move away from that, to not participate. But In fact, I find that now that I've started thinking about social media in this way as a tool that I can use and then put down, maybe ignore for a couple days, I'm better for it when I get back on there. I find more skillfulness, not less. I find more patience, not less. Much in the same way in our day-to-day lives, we sometimes need to retreat on the path and spend time in a temple, and spend time meditating. Same thing with social media. We can put it down for a time and then go back to it. And then when we do go back to it, maybe then we can actually participate in some of those debates that otherwise would have made us be unskillful. We can say things at the right time, in the right way. Because the Buddha did say that there are times when we really can say things that others might find unpleasant, that they might not like, that they might resist. In one of the suttas, the Buddha was talking to a prince, and the prince happened to have a little child on his lap. And the Buddha said, well, let me say it this way in terms of skillful speech. If that little child picked up a pebble or a stick or something like that and started putting it in its mouth and tried to swallow it, you would immediately turn your finger into a hook, fish that thing out, and if you happen to scrape the cheek of the child and it's bleeding, that isn't an unskillful action. You're not trying to harm the child. In fact, what you were doing was highly beneficial to the child, even if the child didn't want that to happen, resists, cries, as often children do when things like that happen. It's the same thing when we come across someone we dislike on social media or who has an opinion we don't like. We might be able to skillfully approach them and share our thoughts, given it's the right time. I find that because so much of social media is very public, anytime you point out someone is wrong, they react very strongly to being told they're wrong. And that in and itself can devolve a conversation. Sometimes it's best, if you know the person in real life outside of social media, to maybe give them a phone call, meet them somewhere, discuss things in person. We somehow manage to be very civil in person. Sometimes out of fear of physical violence, but also sometimes too because then we can see someone's face. We can look them in the eye. We can remember that they're human, that they're flawed, that they're more than just the words they've put out there. But if it's someone that we don't know in person, instead of embarrassing them in a public forum, we can message them privately. We can discuss things through a messenger or something like that so that they're not embarrassed in that way. I know this might sound like a lot of common sense. Truthfully, I think that most of Sila in Buddhism is common sense anyway. Doing things like not stealing, doing things like not killing, to not be harmful to those in our lives through, say, sexual misconduct. Speech, when we talk about it in terms of skillfulness, is the same way. It's very common sense things. But just because something's common sense doesn't mean we're always very good at actually applying those things to our lives. So many times we know what's best and we make the wrong choice anyway. I think back to one of the first times I told a really big lie, and it still mortifies me to this day. I was in first grade. It was around this time of year, maybe closer to November, closer to Thanksgiving, and our first grade teacher decided that she was going to make for us this like little pumpkin treat. She had these cans of pumpkin puree, whipped cream, cinnamon, the whole thing. She made us these little treats, and we're first grade kids gobbling it all up. And I'm really convinced that there is no pumpkin in this thing, because I have no idea what pumpkin puree is. I've only ever seen pumpkins and then pumpkin pie. This is neither of those. It can't possibly be pumpkin. And I'm sitting next to this girl, and she says to me, "Yeah, this is great. I love pumpkin." And I say to her very condescendingly, "This isn't pumpkin. There's no way this is pumpkin." She looks at me and says, "Yes, it is." No, you couldn't possibly be right about this, for I am allergic to pumpkin. I can tell you for a fact I am not allergic to anything. But I thought this was the way to be right about this, because that was the most important thing, being right. So I told that girl, you better believe it, if this was really pumpkin, you wouldn't want to see what would happen if this was pumpkin. And so she does the very smart and mature thing and notifies the teacher immediately. Hey, he just ate pumpkin. He said he's allergic to it. The teacher comes up to me. So, you're allergic to pumpkin? Yes, ma'am. You sure? Yes. And so she runs off to the office to call my mother, who was likely very upset, and I'm sure told her, no, he's not allergic to anything, it's fine. The teacher comes back. So, how are you feeling? Oh yeah, I feel great. So, no allergies, right? You know what, I must have gotten better. I can tell you that when I got home and I saw my mother, I was not better. My mother's a very kind woman, by the way, but she was very angry with me. And even at that early age, it was so important to be right. Not truthful, not correct, certainly not honest, but it was important to be right, even at that age. Now, what happens when we're in our 30s and 40s, and now we want to be right about much more controversial topics than pumpkin puree? Say politics, say religion, say morality. And then we come across people online who have very different beliefs than ours, and they also want to be right. It might be in our best interest to not care if we're right, but to rather speak truth when we know it's true, to speak kindly to others even when we don't think they might care if we're kind. I have found that being online, it's best to be much kinder than I think I need to be, because I don't know what's going on in someone's life, especially some nameless person just wrote something on a blog. I don't know what's going on with them. I don't know why they're saying what they're saying. Whether they actually believe what they're saying, I don't know what their motivations are. But it costs nothing to me to be kind, to simply give out metta, to give out friendliness. And if I disagree, I can disagree kindly. And sometimes the disagreement's not worth it. I can disagree right here and carry on. So now, Facebook, because I'm not on any other social media, honestly, has become very boring. But it's the best thing that could have happened to me. Because now I've got time to focus on things that actually matter to me. I have time to focus on my books. I have time to focus on my meditation. When I do on social media, I share a lot of Dhamma, which doesn't really get a whole lot of likes. I don't know if people are seeing what I'm posting, but I'm putting it out there anyway. And maybe it makes a difference to someone that day, maybe it doesn't. But it's better than what I was doing before, which was getting into a lot of arguments with strangers for no other reason than I thought I was right and they were wrong. And wasting all of that effort. You know, I would have these feelings that I'd carry around all day, this kind of muck of just angst and nervousness, and it just, you can't spend 2 hours fighting with a stranger online and then go meditate and expect it to do anything. It's not, right? Because it's in here still, all of that, all of it's connected. That's why the Eightfold Path is structured the way it is, because you do need to live a certain kind of life if you expect certain kind of results. And it's not just in person, it's not just when we're at a temple, it's not just when we're sitting, and it's not even just when we're at the grocery store. Because we live in this modern age, it also is this other category of our lives, this place that's really no place, this online social media place, that also demands the same type of skill and practice that we observe in the rest of our lives. So I think that's what I have to say on the topic. If people have their own comments, suggestions, or questions, I would love the feedback. And otherwise, we can continue with our very busy days. Yes?
Thank you.